Students from the Fees Must Fall movement are fighting for their future. Those facing criminal charges are asking for presidential pardons. NUMSA and Equal Education are backing their calls for those pardons. Student activist Bongi Kosi Kanyile staged a sleep-in at the union buildings yesterday. The 28-year-old was found guilty of public violence and being in possession of a slingshot during the uprisings. His mother made this desperate plea in Pretoria.
Manje mangabe kuumhlaba lo okwathiwa owenkululeko abakhulula ingane zethu.
Well, finding a job is hard enough, and finding one with a criminal record is almost impossible. Fees Must Fall activists are learning this lesson the hard way. But are they solely to blame? Why don't the older generation of struggle stalwarts address violence in protests? My guests tonight are SAFTU's Zwelinzima Vavi, Right to Protest Stanley Malemacha, and criminal lawyer Ulrich Roux. Very good to have all three of you with us. Let me start off with you. Is the justice system turning students into criminals?
Absolutely, and this is absolutely regrettable that these people who should be celebrated as heroes, who should actually be bestowed with the highest orders that the president usually bestows to citizens who have excelled in certain fields, should actually be bestowed to the likes of Mcebo Dlamini and others who led a heroic struggle for access to quality education at the tertiary level. Instead of us bestowing to them the highest orders and honors that South African can give, we are now hunting them down, seemingly to revenge for what they did for the humanity in our country. Instead of us singing praises to them, we are now sentencing them to prisons and further shutting all possibilities in their face so that they may not have a normal life that they deserve. And this is quite regrettable. And that's why SAFTU have joined the growing chorus of calls being made by many progressive formations in our country to say, but we should demand that they should not be charged, and those that have been found guilty already, we should ask the president to give them presidential pardon, and that those who are currently facing frustrations of going up and down in courts, those charges must be withdrawn, and instead the president should call them to the union buildings for a beautiful lunch and give them the orders that they deserve. They are the perfect recipients, so perfect people who should receive the order of Lutulu,
what are your thoughts?
The Bao and the companions of Oliver Tambo.
Okay, what do you think about how the students have been treated?
Well, I totally agree with Mr. Vavi. Being an attorney at the Right to Protest project, this is my daily job. I work around protest, and the way in which the Fees Must Fall activists are being treated is totally unfair, and I think that it doesn't find room in our constitutional democracy. I mean, first things first, the right to protest is a constitutionally guaranteed right, although it is limited that protesters must be unarmed and the protest must be peaceful. But due to frustrations, some form of violence is inevitable. But instead of harshly punishing the students, it's not really paving a way toward the future South Africa that we want to see. So the vital question will be, are our universities a breeding ground for intellectuals and future leaders, or are they a breeding ground for criminals? Because the way that this Fees Must Fall students are being treated is as if our university is just there to produce criminals.
What do you make of that, Mr. Roux?
Well, obviously, there is a constitutional right to protest. It must be done lawfully and not in an illegal manner. And I think that this is where the debate arises from, is that during these protests, and there were great results achieved by the protests, but unfortunately there was also violence. There was setting alight of a police vehicle. There was carrying of arms, malicious damage to property, assaults, and that can never be condoned. If you break the law in South Africa, then you should be prosecuted, and if a case is proven against you, then you should be sentenced to an appropriate sentence.
Mr. Vavi, what do you make of that? Because that sort of violence cannot be condoned. It's not acceptable.
We're not in any way condoning violence. But again, the question is, the debate, what about? What about the University of Johannesburg that imposed a curfew of 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the morning, where students seen in groups of 4 and 5 were being randomly shot at, tear gassed, and beaten up by private security hired by the university management? What about the students who were being shot at, running away from the hail of bullets of the police? What about the atrocities that were committed by the law enforcers? What about the extent of their brutalization during those protest actions? Have you ever heard in the recent days of a police person in court to answer against all of those atrocities against the students?
I'm going to stop you there because we've got somebody on the line. I didn't get the name. Sisu. Sisu, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I just have a comment here. The EFF has facilitated the Fees Must Fall movement, but after the Fees Must Fall movement and the people went to jail and so on, the EFF leadership comes out and they have degrees and doctorate degrees. I think they are blatant hypocrites. Thank you very much.
I couldn't quite get...
Me too.
Well, yeah, I also didn't get it, but I just want to...
Do you think, sorry, possibly he was talking away about how protests are sometimes kidnapped or hijacked by troublemakers?
I don't know. For some reason, I don't know why, but they seem to be targeting the EFF. Let's talk about this, Jane. Unfortunately, in South Africa, there is a culture that has been building, in particular over the past 24 years. Our people believe that they are not being listened to. Nobody is hearing their plight. And now, inside their system, there's a belief that unless you can bend a tire, no authority will ever come your way to listen to your grievances. And whilst we're still in COSATU, we actually did a survey, and we found out that actually 54% of all workers believed that unless you can invoke some little bit of violence here and there, management is not going to respond. Swap University, in the University of Witwatersrand, also did a study that said over 50% of the citizens of this country believe that unless you can have something burning, and unfortunately sometimes they even ban libraries, something that we unreservedly condemn, but they believe that nobody will listen to you.
Okay, that's a good point. So
put
that to Mr. Roux. I mean, that's a good point, isn't it? I mean, we see so many protests, but until there's an eruption of violence, something burning, that seems to get the attention that the issue possibly deserves.
So what are we saying, that you must burn down something or break something in order to get
no,
it resolved?
there's clearly a problem in the country that's the only thing that elicits any sort of response.
No, well, it's, as I said before, it must be done within the confines of the law. And, you know, as he pointed out, you have a constitutional right to protest, but it must be done lawfully and legally because, and as Mr. Vavi pointed out earlier, if there was violence by the private security firms as well as the police, then those people must be charged. We cannot let lawlessness prevail in these protests, because then we will find ourselves very soon in a barbaric state, and people will just protest, break, burn, assault, and that is unlawful. You cannot do that. If you want to achieve a result, then you must do it within the confines of the law, and that's why I said from the outset the Fees Must Fall movement was unbelievable. The results that it achieved was unprecedented. It was the first time in South Africa that there was such a cohesion among students and to arrange such a protest. But the unlawfulness that accompanied it must face the consequences, such as any other person who breaks the law faces the consequences. And once we can achieve that, in other words, to protest and to strike lawfully without having to cause damage to property and act in an unlawful manner, then we've achieved something. And that's what we should
learn a different way of protest. Let me just bring in Tokana from Durban. Go ahead, Tokana. Then.
Hello?
Hello, go ahead, Tokana.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Felix. I don't understand why we have this debate. We will have this debate in the first place because, one, the president of the country does not have, and rightfully so, the power to stop judicial processes. No one can intervene at the point of apprehension by the police or trial at a court of law. The process must be allowed to take its course to the point where there's an acquittal or sentencing. Secondly, very serious crimes have been committed here. One such student hijacked a bus and now he wants amnesty. He doesn't even deserve the label of student. And the cost of the damage in the wake of the fees must fall, runs into hundreds of millions. And if we allow this nonsense, we'll have a repeat because we're giving these peacetime warriors the license to destroy this country.
Okay. All right, we get your message. Thanks for that, Connor. He's saying that people can't behave in that manner and that the process must be finalized, either get convicted or set free. And possibly the way we protest needs to change.
Yeah, I do understand that. I do understand that if someone breaks the law, then they have to, there are consequences that follow. But Jane, we have to remember one thing. Our criminal law system is not wholly punitive. The whole aim is not just to punish the offender. It is rehabilitative. It is deterrence. So in that, it opens room to say, are there any less restrictive measures that we can impose on an offender instead of sending them to direct imprisonment? What if someone gets sent to direct imprisonment? That means there's an element of trying to protect society against this individual. My question will be, is society afraid of fees must fall students? And the answer is simply no. So the punishment does not meet the offense.
Okay,
simply.
What about that?
Well, you must obviously judge each offence on its own merits. In other words, on the articles that I read, a student was convicted after he had set alight to a police vehicle. He was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment, I think, and 3 years of that was suspended. Now, I can guarantee you that if any other person, whilst he's not protesting and if he wasn't a student, set alight to a police vehicle, he would most likely face the same punishment. Other crimes such as violence or malicious damage to property, of course, the punishment must fit the crime. And there I agree with you in that there is a rehabilitative aspect to our criminal law, and that is, if you can rather rehabilitate a person and reintroduce him into society, then you should do that. It should not be penal in nature. And a lot of the students who were convicted and found guilty of public violence or minor incidents of malicious damage to property were placed on diversion programs where they accept responsibility, they are rehabilitated and reintroduced into society. And that, again, if the punishment fits the crime, I agree, then that must be the course that is followed. But if it is a serious crime and serious violence perpetrated on an innocent person, what would be the punishment if it was a person who wasn't involved?
And I know you want to jump in, but we've sadly run out of time. Mr. Vavi, Mr. Malacha, thank you very much, and Mr. Ruth, thank you.